Poison Information Center, as well as from the Government Medical Officers Association. Publishing research is an essential component of academic and professional development. It not only disseminates new knowledge, but also enhances the visibility and the impact of our work, contributing to evidence-based practice and strengthening the research profile of both the individual academics as well as the institutions. And today, this session is aimed to provide practical guidance on the publication process, from selecting an appropriate journal to preparing a high-quality manuscript, successfully navigating sometimes difficult the peer reviewing process. And we are privileged to have two distinguished academics with extensive experience in research and scientific publications today to share their expertise with us. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Professor Rajitha Wickremasinghe, who will do a short presentation on the essentials that you need to know while preparing to publish your research. If I'm to give a brief introduction, I'm sure many of who are joining on site knows very well about him and doesn't need an introduction. But for those who are joining from a distance, Professor Rajitha Wickremasinghe is who was the Cadre Chair and a Senior Professor of Public Health at the Faculty of Medicine, University of Kelaniya. And he is an internationally recognized epidemiologist and a biostatistician with extensive research experience in the same fields. And he has made an outstanding contribution to health research in Sri Lanka over several decades. And he has authored over 300 peer-reviewed scientific publications, attracting numerous national and international research collaborations to the country as well as to the university. So it's my pleasure to invite you to deliver your speech. Over to you, sir.
Right. Thank you, Kavinda, and good to be back here after a short sojourn. So what we are going to do today is I'm going to team up with Prof. Shamila, and we are going to talk about getting research published. So I'll just briefly give an overview of why you need research, and then Prof. Shamila will give you the details, and then at the end of her presentation, I will give some tips about publishing your research. Right. So first of all, as an academic, right, why do you need research? So I took this from our website. Basically, academic staff of the Faculty of Medicine have to fulfill 4 core functions. That is teaching undergraduate, postgraduate courses, conducting clinical care in affiliated hospitals. That's the service component. Executing high quality research. That is basically generation of knowledge. And then providing student mentorship. So these, whether you like it or not, you have to accomplish, and you are given points for your achievements for your future promotion based on these facts, these areas. So undergraduate and postgraduate teaching, basically delivering lectures, clinical demonstrations, practicals for programs like the MBBS degree program or the BSc program for SHS, speech and hearing sciences, and also academic departments, the support staff development and curricular design. That you have it right at the beginning of your career when you join the faculty. Then you are, those of you in the clinical specialties, you're basically specialists, honorary clinical specialists at the teaching hospitals. And that is what the prof units and other clinicians do, right? And in our case, we have the Colombo North Teaching Hospital as the main teaching hospital in for this faculty. And also there you have to manage specialized units like the AMA's Thalassemia Care Unit. Academic mentorship, acting as designated student advisors, something this is one of the most, one of the hardest things to achieve because students don't come for help, right? They work on their own, and when they're in difficulty only, they show up. And then scientific research, engaging in basic, applied, and clinical research. And we, in this faculty, has specialized units in tropical medicine, hepatology, genetics, and so on, as well as supervising postgraduate, master's, and doctoral level theses. So there is a model of knowledge creation, which is called the SECI model, which comprises of socialization, externalization, combination, and internalization. So this is something like how artificial intelligence works, right? So it gives a framework to show how knowledge evolves. And first of all let's look at two aspects here, tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge. Tacit knowledge is knowledge that you have through various sources like experience and so on, but it's difficult to express it, right? Whereas explicit knowledge is what can be easily put down in writing, right? Explicitly stated. So first of all, now if you take the example of HIV, in 1981, what happened was there was a medical conference in New York, and then two groups of researchers from California and New York, they were discussing and they were talking to each other, and they had the common problem. That is, some patients with pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, right? Or pneumonias with opportunistic infections. And they were discussing this, and then they found out that there was something similar, things which were similar in the two groups of patients. One was they were homosexual, some were drug addicts, and that's how the first reports of HIV/AIDS emerged. So that was the socialization part, and then the externalization came, where then they went into research, and then there was combination of externalization and socialization, and then that gives rise to internalization, and that is basically how AI works. You have some data, you put it into the system, you get some output, right? And then you feed that, based on that output, your practice changes, you feed in more data, right? And the cycle continues, right? Although I'm not a big fan of AI, okay? So first thing is to see what is publishable, right? You have done some research, so how do you know that a journal is going to accept it, right? So there are some important aspects. So originality and novelty. So top journals look for groundbreaking ideas, right? New methodological applications or fresh data that significantly advance the current understanding of a topic. Scientific rigor. So the research must feature flawless study design, complete controls, valid data analysis, transparent reporting of both positive and negative results, and basically it should be reproducible. Someone else should be able to do the same thing following your methodology, and you should get the same result. It should fill a gap, right? And the value of the research is determined by the gap it fills in the literature and practical value it provides to educators, policymakers, or fellow scholars. Methodological soundness. So, proven and tried and tested reproducible methods are often preferred over untested techniques provided they are feasible and properly executed. So, for example, if you look at different study designs, the randomized controlled trial is the best of all the study designs that we know of today. And then they also look at what is called the journal fit. And we have different journals for different audiences, right? So whatever you want to publish should be interesting to the readership of the journal, right? So the paper scope, tone, and focus must closely align with specific criteria for publication established by the target journal. Right. Now, it's famously said that in academia, either you publish or perish. So I just had a look at the marking scheme for your promotion. Right, so from lecturer, senior lecturer to associate professor or professor. So under section 2.1.1, there are marks for research publications in refereed journals, right? So it is based on the contribution you make for each publication. And the way you assess that is depending on where your name appears in the author list. Right? The more important contributions are given at the front end, and the lesser contributions are put later on. Then usually the last author also is the author, the senior most author who would have helped to carry out the research. So for each paper in a journal, you can get up to 3 points, right? And then that is, you get up to 3 points in a journal that publishes at least 2 issues per year. If it's less than 2 issues per year, you get 2 points. Now, if the journal is recognized in an indexed, if it's an indexed journal, you can add 2 additional points to that. Okay? Right. Then you get points for peer-reviewed presentations at national and international conferences. If it's published as full papers, you get up to 1 point per paper. If it's published in abstract form, up to 0.75 points per abstract. Right? So whatever you are going to present next week at SLMA sessions or anything, you will get points up to points out of 0.75. And if it's presented with evidence, you get up to 0.5 point per presentation. Then there is another category where you get points for citation of the applicant's work. And you get 0.5 points per citation, but subject to a maximum of 10 points. Right, so if you have more than 20 citations, right? You can't go above 10 points. Okay? Now, usually I'll let you decide. What do you think is the best option from the previous? From these options that you have, where do you get the maximum number of points? Obviously, if you publish it as a paper, right? In a refereed journal that publishes at least 2 issues per year. Now, what usually happens in Sri Lanka is a conference presentation is made and the process stops there. Right, so you're very happy now. You get on stage, you're in a nice kit, people are photographing you, and then you make the presentation. You're very happy about it. And you have abstract also. Right, but you'll be better off if you write up the paper. Okay, that's why that's what happens here in Sri Lanka. Right, so it does not proceed to publication of a paper. And of course, there are many reasons for lack of progress. And one reason, a big reason, is basically we are overworked. That's what I was just talking with Prof. Shamila as well, how they cope with increasing student numbers. It's difficult for us to do research. In other countries, people are just taken just to do research, and not in Sri Lanka. In places like UK and all that, sometimes for each postgraduate student, you have 3 researchers. Whereas we have, for one staff member, we have about 5-6 students. Right? As said earlier, the title should be catchy. It's like reading a newspaper. You open a newspaper, what you're going to read depends on how the headlines or the title of that column, how it appeals to you. Right? Now, some journals require that the type of study design be mentioned in the title. Now, most BMC journals and also the BMJ journals require this, right? So you can say something, cross-sectional study or randomized control trial or something like that. Abstract can be structured or unstructured, generally 250 to 350 words. And when you submit your thing online, if it exceeds that, it won't take up the abstract. Okay? And the structured abstract has to be under these headings: introduction or background, methods, results, and conclusions. No discussion. And then you have the keywords, generally 3 to 5 or 5 to 10. And when you select keywords, select words that will give your publication the best chances of being cited. Right, so most of the time, if you're doing something in Sri Lanka, make sure Sri Lanka is there, because then it would come up. Okay? Your introduction or background should also include a good up-to-date literature review, and this should include regional and local literature as well. And when you give factual data, make sure that the appropriate citation is also given. And the citation should be given as specified by the journal, whether it's the Vancouver system or the APA system or whatever, right? So whatever system is, if you use a computer program, you can generate the citations as needed. So the introduction should indicate what is known about the topic, gaps in knowledge, and justification for the study. And the proposed research questions, hypotheses, aims, and objectives of the study may be combined and generally given in the last paragraph of the introduction or background. Okay? Then we come to the methods. So separate sections in a paper should reflect on the items pertaining to that section. Right. So for example, methods should not be included in the results. Sometimes we have this tendency to write the method also in the results. Okay? And discussion should not be included in the results. I'll give some examples later on. So under methods, you should give the details of the study design, the sample size calculation, sampling procedure, data collection, training of data collectors, standardization of methods, details of equipment used, and data analysis, and so on. Giving a flow diagram of the data collection procedure, like for systematic reviews, is helpful to summarize information for the readership. I'll give an example of that as well. And generally, at the end of the methods section, an ethics statement should be given. And you can also include the reference number of the ERC application. Right. In the methods, you should give units of all measurements, and appropriate references should also be given. And all this is done to make sure, to ensure that someone else repeating the research would come up with the same results. Right. Now, how do we present the results? So first of all, describe the sample. Everyone will want to know what your sample looks like. Right. So basically, how many, the distribution of the sample by sex, age group, ethnicity, and so on. Then you can go into detailed analysis in a systematic manner, where you present univariate, bivariate, and multivariable analysis. So description of the sample is a univariate method of presentation, where you describe your sample by a single variable. Then you do associations with another variable. And finally, you present a multivariate model. Right? Then summarize data into tables and figures. Usually, these journals will accept about 5 tables and 2 figures. The more tables and more figures you have, they are unlikely to be accepted. Right, so 5 tables, 2 figures is a good number. So you have to prepare the tables and figures based on journal instructions. For example, figures have to be of a certain resolution as specified by the journal. So I think most of them will accept about 200 dpi, dots per inch, I think. 300, okay. Right. So not necessary to repeat everything in a table or figure in the text, like in the case of a dissertation or thesis already mentioned by Prof. Shamila. All tables and figures should be cited in the text. For example, if you're giving a result, giving something from a table in the result, then you have to say see in table or figure, whatever. All tables and figures should be titled. The figures should also have a legend. And generally, sometimes tables and have to be uploaded separately. So you have to check with the journal. Okay? Right. So writing tips, the discussion. So as already mentioned, give a brief summary of the result, then discuss the findings. Then try to give explanations comparing with other studies, right? And then based on what you have done, you propose possible hypotheses for further research. You should, I think, an important part of your discussion should also be the limitations of your research study. It can be the methods that you used, or can also be the data that you have collected and the data that you have not collected. Okay? So acknowledge limitations of your study and how you would overcome them if you were to do the study again. Now you have to draw conclusions based on the findings of your study. You can't make generic statements that could be made without doing your study. Sometimes we try to give generic conclusions. So in this aspect, it is good to refer to criteria of causality and making conclusions. With a single study, it's difficult to prove anything. You can only suggest something. For proving something, you have to look at so many different aspects. The type of study, right? The degree of association, like odds ratio or relative risk. Okay, then temporality, whether the exposure preceded the outcome, and so on. Now, there is also other information that needs to be included. Some have already been mentioned. Now, some journals, right at the beginning, you had to describe what the manuscript highlights: strengths, weaknesses, and limitations. This is true for the BMJ journals. Then there are checklists for publication. These are the strobe checklists and consort statements. Then what you can't put in a table, regular table, but you feel that it provides additional information, you can include as what are called supplementary materials. So you can have supplementary tables, supplementary figures. They come separately. They support whatever you have said in your paper. Some journals you have to give the abbreviations and the long forms of the abbreviations. Conflicts of interest, right? Especially when it comes to funding. Then data sharing statement. Now most journals will ask for, will ask you to submit in an archive anonymized data so that someone else can analyze it themselves. So usually for that to happen, you have to have the ethics committee approval, right? So one way of getting around it is that you can say that you have not got ethics approval and people can be identified by the data, but you can, if you write to the corresponding author, the data can be shared on a reasonable request. That's usually accepted. Right, ethics statement, authorship's already done, then acknowledgements. Right? So this is also important. And then the references. Right, so general writing tips expressing in the first person and third person clarify with the journal instruction. Right? Some journals allow the use of we and so on, but others do not. Okay, then you have to express in the third person. Grammatical tense, usually methods and results should be in the past tense because it's already been done. Discussion, it will depend on the context. You can use the past or the present tense. Right? AI incorporation. Okay, so when we started our research, there was no AI, but now it's accepted. So just state it, right? Then cover letter, you need to have a cover letter, give reasons on the appropriateness of the manuscript for the journal. Right? You also have to state that all authors have read the manuscript and agreed to submit it to the relevant journal, not currently considered for publication by any other journal, and corresponding author takes all responsibility for the content of the article, and the corresponding author has to sign off the article. Responses to reviewer comments, address each comment and be courteous. I'll show you some example. You can't have you can't go with the idea that how dare the guy ask me this question, he should know, and all that. That approach is not acceptable. And what we must also understand is you may know everything about the study you have described, but the reviewer does not know, right? So you have to assume that the reviewer knows nothing about it. Right. Now just getting some examples. Just read this results that someone sent me and I'll show you how I corrected it. Right? So here it is. A study conducted in an urban population in India also found that individuals aged over 40 years had a substantially higher risk of chronic pain than younger participants. Right? Okay. So these were my edits for that. And I have shortened the content there. I just say non-specific chronic pain is increased with advancing age. That is basically the finding of that study. There is no need of saying a linear trend of increase, right? Right. Then look at how I have shortened the second paragraph. However, not all studies have reported that one. Just say in contrast, there were many reports of no significant association between age and presence of chronic pain. Right? So that's how you reduce the number of words. Then here I say among urban Indians, this covers everything given here, study conducted in an urban population in India. Right? So you just say in a study of urban Indians, okay, among urban. Then the next one I say among Chinese population, and that is for this one. Okay? Right. So this goes on further. Right? So this was what was submitted. Right? And then this is how I edited it. Now, can you tell me the role? Oops. Of can you tell me this sentence, the first sentence, non-specific chronic pain increase with advancing pain, advancing age in mixed population samples and among men. Now, is this part of the results? That is discussion. Okay? So that can go out. Okay? So that is where you should not bring in another component. Right? So then you look at the okay. This one. Evidence from cross-national research suggests that these inconsistent findings may partly reflect differences between populations and countries. That again is not part of results. So that can be eliminated. Right. Then we come to responses to reviewer comments. So what I do is I make a table like this. I say reviewer comment and response to reviewer comments. And as Prof. Shamila said, you have to be very courteous and you can even thank the reviewers. For example, reviewer 1, the first comment, overall the paper is well written, however the following points are not clear. So start off, okay, we appreciate the reviewer's comments. And as Prof. Shamila said, you say what changes you have made and include that. Okay, that's a good guide. And so you take the second comment here. As per the sampling procedure is explained in previous, participants were informed by house visit. If there were more than one member in a house, did they all included in the study? Better to include that. So yeah, you made the changes and say in your response the changes that you made. Now, there are some things, some facts that you can't change, and you have completed your study. You can't go back and do it again. So, how will you overcome such a situation? You just tell, okay, as part of the limitations, you say, this is a limitation of this study. Okay? And what you have to show here is that you have made an attempt to make some corrections. I think reviewers like it. And when you give the detailed responses to their comments, it's easy for them also just to go over there. Right? So that's an example. Then we come to the other checklist. Now, these for randomized control trials, you have to have what is called the consolidated standard for reporting trials, which is called the consort statement. And here you have to give the details of how you selected your sample, how many you enrolled, right? How many were withdrawn or eliminated, and then how many were randomized, the allocation. Right. Now tell me the difference between random selection and random allocation, randomization. Random selection is when you select your sample from the population. And random allocation or randomization is when you divide your selected sample into case or into experiment and control groups. And so you have to give all these numbers, the allocation, the follow-up, and the analysis. Okay, so this is a must for randomized control trials. Likewise, there are strengthening the reporting of observational studies in epidemiology. These are called the STROBE checklists. And you have these checklists for different types of studies, cohort, case control, cross-sectional studies. And basically, these are not very difficult to fill. And these all epidemiological studies should include one of these as an additional file. So this is the editors go through this and see if you have completed all sections. Then for qualitative studies also there is one called the consolidated criteria for reporting qualitative studies or standards for reporting qualitative research. So I'll show you an example. So this is basically a stroke document. So you have the different sections, title and abstract. So you have to give the page number and you just give a comment, right? So this is always good to fill, right? So this is for observational studies. And it's not very long, but basically you have to give the page numbers in which those items appear. So finally, what is needed to be a successful researcher should be trained to do research. But I think there is a inherent luck is also a must. You have to be lucky to get things published and so on. Before you start your research, I think you should think about publication. Think about publication before starting research. And you should be vigilant and flexible to see possibilities beyond the relevance of the project. As already said, it requires perseverance and commitment and requires a lot of patience. You can't, you have to be patient with the reviewers also. And when your paper is accepted for publications, basically that's the climax you reach. And at the end of it, you will you are proud of the accomplishments of your achievements in retirement. So good luck to all of you. And if you need any help with some editorial work, I'll be happy to do so.
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir, for your insightful lecture.